Well, it's 10:02. I don't know. Is there people in the waiting room?
Yeah, people are waiting. I'm going to let them in, and then we can just wait a couple more minutes.
Okay.
It's going to be like a private group today. Hi.
Hi, Angela.
How is everybody? Hi, Jeff. Hi, Dan.
Hey, good morning.
Hi, Patrick. Sorry. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Angela. We still have some folks joining in, so a couple more minutes and then we'll start. Jeff and Dan, you folks, you guys ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Murphy. I'm the Executive Director of the Saranac Lake Area Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here today with some folks from the SBA and Matt Courtwright of the Ticonderoga Area Chamber of Commerce. And we are co-hosting this session to provide an opportunity for folks to hear updates on the newest relief measures that were implemented in the Economic Aid Act to help reinforce some of the federal relief measures for small businesses. And we're co-hosting today with Matt Courtwright from Ticonderoga Area Chamber of Commerce. And I just want to thank everyone for participating today, for lending their time and their expertise. So Matt, do you have anything else you'd like to add as an intro?
Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for being part of today's webinar with the SBA and the Saranac Lake Area Chamber of Commerce. As Patrick said, my name is Matthew Courtwright from the Ticonderoga Area Chamber of Commerce. We're thrilled to continue to partner with the Saranac Lake Area Chamber as well as the SBA to provide this webinar as a much needed service to our members and our regional business community. We have and will continue to work closely with all of our partners, and I see that SBDC is on the call, who are an amazing partner with us. To provide an array of member benefits, services, and programs, represent our business community to the best of our ability, and of course, stay on top of the guidelines that are forever changing, as well as important funding programs like this that we're going to talk about today. We have a number of other things scheduled in the upcoming months, so stay tuned. At this time, I would like to introduce the SBA team who is with us today. Dan Rickman, who is the SBA Deputy Director, and Jeff Boyce, who is the SBA Upstate New York Branch Manager.
Hey, thanks a lot, Matt. I'm Dan. I think you guys can see my name there. Appreciate you guys again inviting us to speak about these important relief programs. I think this is the second or third we've done with you guys. I can't keep up with all the PPP webinars.
I can't keep up either, but we're very appreciative of the time you're able to give us and our communities.
Yeah, well, you know, we appreciate the opportunity to speak to your members, and certainly we rely on partners and organizations like yours to get the word out about these critical programs. So like you said, you know, we're going to talk, I think, focus mostly on the certainly the Paycheck Protection Program and the updates from the Economic Aid Act that went into place in December. as well as a couple of the other relief programs that SBA is administering as part of that. Just a little bit about, where we've been, or how we got to this point. The CARES Act was launched last April. So believe it or not, we've been, working through these relief programs for quite a while now. And, they've certainly evolved over time. And SBA's, certainly had a big role in that. To date, I think we're pushing with the Paycheck Protection Program over $550 billion in loans to small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program. So, it's one of the largest, I think, or maybe the largest economic relief program for small businesses in the history of our country. And now with the current round, to date, Congress authorized a little over $280 billion for the program, and we've used $35 billion so far. So I think we understand that the anticipation is that these funds will last through March 31st, which is when the application window ends for this round of PPP. So, hopefully folks are able to get, some information from this presentation to kind of plan out how they want to participate in these funds. So with that, Jeff's going to do the formal presentation here, and I think we'll both handle some Q&A throughout, and let you guys moderate the Q&A since, it's your show. So we'll let you handle that part, the fun part. So Jeff, floor is yours.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Yeah, so let's jump right in, right? So as Dan said, we're going to talk about the Economic Aid Act this morning and the Paycheck Protection Program, and we'll talk about some more big numbers. So you see here at the top, $284 billion in new funding for the PPP. That's fantastic. Dan gave you some numbers, again, looking back from when the program opened last March through August 8th. Here in New York State, we saw 348,870 PPP loans. That's good, but what's better is the funding that brought to our state, $38.7 billion in new monies, economic aid right here to New York. It's really been a lifeline for American workers, businesses, private nonprofits, but thousands and thousands of them right here in upstate New York. Dan gave you some numbers in terms of this round of PPP, about $35 billion. Has been spent so far. That's great. We're seeing a much more measured approach. It isn't the Wild West and some of the craziness that we saw back in April. We're seeing really a much more sort of measured, planful approach of businesses going to the lender for funding, and that's great. Here in New York State, if we drill into that, just in the first few weeks of the program, we've seen about 20,000 loans approved from SBA 7A lenders for about $2.2 billion. So take those numbers together, 38.7 from the previous rounds, monies to New York, and already 2.2 billion. So that's fantastic. We're off to, I think, a really strong start yet again. Here are some dates just to remind folks. So the program opened back on January 11th. It was this kind of a phased launch, starting the first week with our CFIs, and you see there in the blue box what those are. These are, really lenders that are best able to serve women, minority, and veteran entrepreneurs, and the very smallest small businesses. We started with those lenders to be sure that these types of businesses had really great access to this funding, first and foremost. Then on the 19th, the Tuesday after the holiday weekend, we opened the program up to all of our 7A approved lenders, and that's where we are today. You can go to any bank or credit union and submit your application for a first or second draw PPP. And as Dan said, the program sunsets on March 31st, assuming the funding is available through that time. If you're not sure of how to find a lender, there's a great tool on our website, which again is sba.gov. It's a tool where you can find a lender. It's a feature that does just that. It works great. I've tried it myself. You put in your zip code and it returns results on kind of a map-based image with the little pins in the map of banks and credit unions that are geographically closest to you. that could take an application for you for Paycheck Protection Program funding. So let's talk about the program. Let's talk about what's the same, and then we'll talk about what's different, and different is good. We'll get into that. So the good news is that the foundation really is the same, right? So you see on this slide, who's eligible and what does this program provide? So the eligibility was and remains very, very broad. So you can be the smallest of small businesses. You could be that sole proprietor, independent contractor, a self-employed individual. The business is you. You have one employee. Good news, you're eligible for this funding. But also eligible are small businesses up to having 500 employees. So that's pretty big, but still by our standards, a small business. Also, certain nonprofit organizations, you see here 501c3s and C19s, and we'll talk about some expansion. So lots of different types of entities are eligible for the program. And again, what does it provide? It provides forgivable loans of up to $10 million. This is a loan, so you're going to go to a bank or credit union, you're going to apply, you're going to complete some loan documents, and that's how the funding is structured. It is initially a loan that you're applying for that, if you achieve the conditions, it becomes fully forgivable. So it has a 5-year term and has a 1% interest rate. But importantly, look here at the bottom, no application fee, no collateral, no personal guarantee. The intent is that it's fully forgiven and the repayments are deferred for 10 months. So that's what we're still talking about. And again, the size of your loan is calculated generally on 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. And as we know, that includes, primarily salary, wages, commission, tips, but also all of those costs that employers incur for benefits they provide to their employees, healthcare benefits, retirement benefits, vacation, leave time, all of that stuff goes into the calculation. And again, if you're one of those smallest small businesses and the business is you, then you're basically looking at your net income or your earnings from that self-employment, and you're taking 1/12 of that. That becomes your average monthly payroll multiplied by that factor of 2.5. So that's good. That's the foundation. Let's talk about some of the new enhancements. So you've heard these terms probably: first draw, second draw. The Economic Aid Act introduces these terms. And really what it means is that if you did not apply for a Paycheck Protection loan previously to when the program ended back on August 8th, but for whatever reason you now want to and you're eligible, then that application is what's known as a first draw application. So really what that means is we're back in business again. We can make Paycheck Protection Program loans. So that's great. There are some different and additional entities that are eligible. We'll talk about those. And importantly, the non-payroll eligible forgivable expenses list has been expanded. And you see some of those here in bold. So operation expenditures, property damage costs, supplier costs, worker protection expenditures. All of these things are now eligible uses of the funds. And I think what you'll see as we talk through some of these enhancements is that Congress was listening, right? They heard from their constituents about things that were maybe less ideal with the first round of the program. And as they authorized this additional money, they made changes along with providing the funding so that it could be even more impactful. And that's what we're seeing. Finally, you see here that eligible borrowers can apply for what's known as a second draw PPP. And all that means is that you got one before, and if you meet some criteria that we'll talk about, you can apply for a second forgivable loan. So I hope you agree a good program has really gotten better. So who can apply? At the bottom here is the list we just talked about, but look here at the top. So these newly eligible entities can apply for a Paycheck Protection Program loan. Housing cooperatives, not as common in upstate New York, but they do exist. Destination marketing organizations, we've got lots of those. So those folks can now apply. Similarly, 501c6 organizations, there was some ambiguity about that in the previous round. They were not explicitly eligible, but they are now, right? So chambers of commerce, Patrick, Matt, trade organizations are now explicitly eligible to apply for a Paycheck Protection Program loan, as are certain news organizations. So here is a slide that talks about some of the, again, some of the non-payroll ways in which you can use the PPP funds and achieve partial or full forgiveness. So operations expenditures are things like costs related to software and cloud computing and human resources and accounting needs. Every business has those to some extent. Property damage expenditures. So unfortunately, there's been a lot of civil unrest and disturbances and protests around the country, some of which have resulted in actual physical property damage. And so the cost that a business incurs to fix things, to pay for that damage, to the extent that it has not been covered by their insurance policies, are in fact, eligible ways to use the funds. Supplier expenditures, again, many businesses have costs, need to spend money to subcontractors and suppliers to basically do what they do to fund their production. So those costs are potentially eligible, as are worker protection expenditures. So think of all the things that small businesses have done to comply with federal, state, and local requirements. They've bought PPE for their employees. They've changed the way their business operates to put in sneeze guards or to do curbside pickup or outdoor seating. So those types of things related to complying with these federal, state, and local health requirements are conceivably eligible ways to use the funds. And so, the mantra on this, as it's always been, is now still keep good records, have really good documentation of how you've spent these monies in these eligible costs so that you can achieve that full forgiveness. So that's a great segue. Let's talk about the forgiveness process. So one of the changes that we've seen is in the covered period. So if you think back, excuse me, to the previous round, pardon me, the covered period is the time period in which, excuse me, you spend the money. So the covered period begins immediately upon receipt of the funds from your lender, and it continues for an 8 or 24-week period. And so in the first round of the PPP, it was 8 weeks. And that was not ideal for many folks. So it was 8 or 24 weeks. Now, your covered period is any time between that 8 and 24 weeks. So if 9 weeks is the right time period for you, or if 12 or 13 or 23 weeks is the best time for you to spend those funds, that is your covered period. So that provides more flexibility and a greater range, excuse me, of time to use those funds. Another important change is that the EIDL emergency advance is no longer deducted or taken away from your maximum PPP forgiveness. Again, I think, this was something that Congress heard, that folks were frankly not always thrilled with the fact that if they got one of those EIDL emergency advances, that was taken away from their maximum PPP forgiveness. And so that's no longer the case. And in fact, our agency is going through an automated process to basically rebate those funds back to borrowers that had that reduction. And then finally, the applications for forgiveness, some great changes there. So if you think back when the PPP forgiveness application first came out, it was thorough, it was complete. There was a lot of information and calculations that you had to go through. And folks said, could it be simpler? And in fact, our agency came out with an easy version of that had more attestations and fewer calculations, which was great. But folks said, could it be even simpler still? And so again, great news. Our agency came out with the simplest version of the forgiveness application, but that was only for loans of less than $50,000. And so with the Economic Aid Act, that bar, that threshold for using the very simplest application for forgiveness has now been raised to $150,000. And that's great because we know the vast majority of PPP loans are under that 150 threshold. So the majority of folks who receive these funds will be able to take advantage of that really most simplified application for forgiveness. All right, so we talked about the second draw PPP and the ability for folks to apply for additional funding. Here you see some of the criteria. So first of all, the maximum loan size that you could qualify for a second draw PPP is less. So, you know, for a first draw PPP, you could be eligible for a loan of up to $10 million. That's great. With the second draw, that ceiling has been lowered to 2 million, which is still substantial, but that's the maximum amount of funding that you can qualify for. The calculation of that is substantially the same. It's that 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. But if your business is in the accommodations and food services sector, also known as a NAICS 72 code, you can qualify for a second draw PPP based upon 3.5 times your average monthly payroll. And so what you see again is Congress trying to direct even more of these funds to businesses that have been most significantly impacted by the pandemic. Think about bars and restaurants and folks that are in this sector. They've either not been able to operate at all or operated under significant constraints. So this is definitely helpful. And with the initial funding that we've seen dispersed so far, some 20% of the applications in this latest round have been for businesses in that NAICS Code 72 sector. So that's great. So that's a second draw. Here's a little more information on specifically who can apply. So the first criteria is kind of obvious. You had to have received the first draw PPP and fully expended or will expend those funds on eligible costs before you can apply and receive a second draw PPP. It's kind of intuitive, but that is in fact the first eligibility criteria. You see some other ones here in red. So the maximum number of employees that you can have for a second draw PPP has been lowered from 500 down to 300, which is still, you know, pretty substantial, pretty good size. But importantly, look here at this last criteria. You have to be able to demonstrate a 25% or greater reduction in your gross receipts by comparing the exact same quarter from 2019 to 2020. So that's really important. But again, it's directing this funding to businesses that have been significantly adversely impacted and can demonstrate it through this reduction in their gross receipts. And you do that basically by providing business records, right? Things like quarterly financial statements, bank statements, IRS tax filings. You know, this is where your accountant, your bookkeeper, your SBDC advisor or score counselor can really help you look at your records and come up with a really solid way to demonstrate that reduction in your gross receipts to then qualify for the second draw PPP. So that's kind of a whirlwind of, you know, PPP, what's old, what's new. I want to just touch briefly on a couple of other programs. So EIDL, right? So economic injury disaster loans. Recall, this is an existing tool that's been in our toolbox for a long time. It's a low interest, long-term working capital loan. It was really the first thing that we could offer when the disaster first hit. The CARES Act made some important changes to the program to make it expand eligibility and change some of the other parameters in helpful ways. But the CARES Act also created this notion of an EIDL emergency advance, and that's a grant. It was a targeted grant, basically meted out on this $1,000 per employee basis up to $10,000. And so more good news, the Economic Aid Act provided additional funding for this program because the monies for EIDL advances ran out. So there's $20 billion in additional funding for EIDL emergency advances, but it gave us some direction. And it said SBA basically take those monies and give them out to these two priority groups, first and foremost. Those who got some monies before through EIDL, but not the full 10,000. Congress said that was our intent now. We really want to be sure that folks got the full 10,000. So go back and help those folks get the full $10,000 regardless of the number of employees as the first priority group. The second priority group they talked about are those folks who applied for EIDL before and got nothing, right? So the EIDL advance monies ran out, but the EIDL program, the essence of EIDL, continued. And so there were people that applied for EIDL after those grant monies ran out and they got nothing. And so they said that's the second priority group to go back and to assist through this additional funding. But they said, here's the criteria upon which those folks may be eligible to get up to the full $10,000. Number one, They have 300 or fewer employees, and that hopefully is not problematic for many of these folks. Number two, they have to be located in a low income area. And our agency is in the process of developing a tool that will be used to easily identify that based upon the address of the business. And then thirdly, they must demonstrate a 30% reduction in their revenues during an 8-week period. So not 25 gross receipts, but in this case, it's a 30% reduction. So that's the way in which folks will be able to, in these two priority groups, access some of these monies. There is no application for this. It will be handled automatically because we know who these people are. We've already engaged with them through the EIDL application process. So as you see here, applicants do not need to take any action. Our agency will reach out to them and will provide some guidance on how they may be able to benefit from this additional funding. So that's more great news. Finally, I just want to mention a brand new program, right? So the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, brand new. You see here who's eligible. It's kind of intuitive based upon the name of the program. It will provide grants of up to $10 million for entities in operation as of February 29th. So like all the things we're talking about here, these resources are not for startups. If you started a business during the pandemic, that's amazing and kudos to you. But these programs are really for existing businesses to help them continue to survive and to go forward. So there's $15 billion in funding for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program. Lots of great information already on the SBA website and more to come. Maybe a little bit more today. I encourage you to take a look at the SBA website. Just the one quick caveat I would mention about this program is that you cannot right now simultaneously apply for a PPP and a Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. You could conceivably be eligible for both, but you cannot simultaneously apply for both. You really need to think about which would be more advantageous and go that route. So more to come on this program. Applications, as you see here, are not currently yet being accepted by the SBA, but hopefully they will be soon. All right, so finally, just in closing, what to do, if PPP is right for you, contact your lender. I explained to you how to find one. If EIDL is right for you, go to our website, as Dan said, sba.gov. You can find then their information on all these programs. Again, a plug for our resource partners. They're great help with getting the records and the materials you need together for these programs. So SCORE, SBDC, Women's Business Centers, and Veterans Business Outreach Center, which we're fortunate to have located right here in New York State. They can be a great help. My email address is here. Dan's, you could probably figure out from this same construct. We're here to help. And with that, let's take the balance of our hour and talk about some Q&A. Thank you.
Jeff, I appreciate it. I wanted to allow just a moment for Bernard, who happened to come on the call. Some tech difficulties prohibited him from getting on right away, but please, introduce yourself to the group, and we're really happy to have you join us. Thank you.
So first of all, I apologize for not being able to get in. I wasn't sure what was going on there, but we did it. Thanks again for hosting this. I'm sure Jeff and Dan have filled you in more than adequately at this point. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this information with everyone, and know that we're here to help you, and anything that we can do, we want to do that. I know that one important thing, two important things really, is that these programs can and will probably change in small ways between now and the end of the year. So the best information that you're going to get on a daily basis is on our website. They've probably mentioned that, but just in case, I want to reiterate and enforce that at sba.gov. So with that, I'd like to start and open the questions. I'm here to try to find out exactly what the issues are and the problems are out in the field with small businesses and our service providers, just to get a feeling for how things are going. So again, thanks again for doing this, and let's take some questions.
Well, I'll start just with a question that I have. we have, a number of different venues that might be looking at wondering if they want to go through with a PPP or with the Shuttered Venue Operating Grant. Is there a way in which you would help folks understand which one they should really think about going for? Since the Shuttered Venue Grant portal application process isn't open yet, but the PPP is there some sort of way in which you would suggest folks look at the two programs to wait for that Shuttered Venue Grant application process to open, or to look at the PPP?
Well, so I guess the short answer is we really can't, provide any recommendations on one program over the other. I think if you visit, SBA.gov and review what we know so far, which is not a whole lot more than Jeff conveyed, you'll notice that the eligibility is, certainly limited to those specific, organizations that were listed, right? Those venue operators. So these are, generally going to be, these are going to be businesses for whom that's their primary, industry. Okay, I'm sure we're going to post some more details on our website, but I guess generally speaking, Jeff mentioned, for example, the enhancements for the PPP program for NAICS Code 72 industries, right? Restaurants, hospitality accommodations. Well, that means those businesses that primarily engage, that is their primary business activity. So it is not enough if I'm a restaurant, for example, and I do some live music and it's 10% of my revenues. That's probably not going to make me eligible for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, right? So there isn't really a choice there or a comparison because it's not your primary industry, okay? That's some speculation on our part, but I would be shocked if it was anything different. The other thing to keep in mind is that I know it sounds like a lot of money, $25 billion, but there's it's still relatively small, and there's going to be a phased rollout. Okay, for example, for the first 2 weeks, once the program opens, only businesses that have suffered a 90% loss of revenues may apply. So it's a 2-week period. Okay. Then if there's funds remaining, they'll go into the second phase, which is, I think, 70% loss in revenues. And that's another 2 weeks. So, for the first month that this program is going to be live, it's only going to be businesses that have lost 90 or 70% in revenues, and then I think there's like 60 days before it opens up to the whole world. Funding permitting. Okay. So that's something else that folks should keep in mind. I think if you're a business that you think you're eligible for both, and you want to kind of wait for the details to come out for SVO, you still have plenty of time. The PPP funds, like we shared at the beginning, there's plenty of money left, right now. So I don't think that there's you don't have to decide this week probably to apply for PPP. You can probably wait for some of those details to come out. While monitoring the availability of funds in the PPP program, and hopefully more details will come on SVOG. So I think we're hearing that some additional details actually will be posted today on our website. So you might want to visit SBA.gov and the SVOG screen and hit refresh a little bit, or just wait until we send it out to everybody, and then you guys will in turn probably send it out to everybody. But there will be some additional details to come. So
just a quick follow-up on that, Dan. I think your recommendation to think of, first of all, are you just in that group that's going to be eligible for that, but also look at your loss of revenue and seeing where that might come into play, understanding that this is a very targeted grant that is looking specifically to help those folks who are that were really shuttered and lost, like you said, that 90% threshold. Someone else, Angela, just had a quick follow-up. Do you know if there will be employee retention metrics or employee headcounts included in the application process, and any follow-up needed to prove about the eligible expenses for the grant?
I do not.
Okay.
It doesn't seem like there's some requirements, some follow-up record keeping requirements. I don't know about any specific rules with respect to that at this point.
So we'll keep a lookout and hopefully be able to update folks when that time comes.
Patrick, just to clarify, what I was suggesting is when you're trying to decide between both, you might want to consider whether or not there'll be employee or retention rules with the shuttered venue, which I'm sure we're waiting on clarification for, because if you're shut down or operating at greatly reduced capacity where people are not coming, it's very difficult to achieve payroll or headcount maintenance when you're not, in business or people aren't coming to your venue. So is that something we know anything about, Dan or Jeff?
Well, no, there does not appear to be any such requirements. This is not a different version of PPP. This is a different program.
Right. Yep.
It's not related to PPP. So, folks should not think of them as the same.
That's why I'm thinking someone that can't maintain headcount or payroll probably may want to consider that fits program, may want to consider this grant over PPP as they're thinking about which one is right for them.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that's been said is true. And also think too about how each grant is calculated. Just kind of back of the envelope, and what does your operation look like, right? Do you have a large payroll? Do you have major headcount, and do you have major payroll expenses that would go into calculating a significant PPP forgivable loan or not? And conversely, how might you fare under the calculations, kind of back of the envelope for this Shuttered Venue Operators Grant? That I think also needs to be part of your strategy, which would be a better fit for you and provide you with the most advantageous funding. But again, as Dan said, thinking about too, that phased kind of rollout of the applications for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. And where do you fall in that too? Would you be one of those first or second tiers, or might you be at the bottom? All of that, I think, will go into this. And, as everyone has said, keep watching our website for additional details in the actual application for this.
Wonderful. Thanks, Angela, for pushing that question along. And I just want to get back to one question that came in during the EIDL advance portion of your conversation, Jeff. And Kim had a question about if someone didn't apply because funds had run out for that EIDL advance, is there an option for them to be able to utilize that grant? And if I am misunderstanding the question, Kim, please jump on and help ask that.
Yeah, so remember the core EIDL program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, as it relates to what we call COVID EIDL, right? So the disaster that was declared, which is the pandemic, that was set to sunset at the end of last calendar year, but was extended through all of 2021. So if you did not apply for the core program itself, the loan, you can, that program is open. You do that through our website, not through a bank or credit union. Conceivably, if some of that $20 billion was still left after satisfying, all the folks in these two priority groups, maybe there would be an opportunity, but there's just no way to predict that. And if you think about this logically and think about the number of folks who are likely in these two priority groups and the amount of money allocated, while it seems like a lot, that's not something I would really focus on as a strategy. Focus on what you really need. Do you need a first or second draw PPP, or do you need an EIDL loan? Those would be, I think, most impactful. And this, small amount of this EIDL emergency advance, it would be a nice benefit as an also add-on. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess the bottom line is no, there's no way to apply for an EIDL, a targeted EIDL advance at this point, period. It is not something that anybody can proactively prepare themselves to do. And I don't think anybody expects that the 20 billion is going to extend beyond the people that have already applied last year. And just so folks are generally aware, SBA received 16 million applications for the EIDL program last year. So I think that tells you everything you need to know right there about, how far those funds are going to last.
Right.
Granted, there is a requirement. It is targeted to the low-income neighborhoods, and you have to suffer, 30% reduction in revenues over an 8-week period and all that. But 16 million applications, even if it's 20% of those are eligible, that's, 3 or 4 million people, 3 or 4 million businesses. So.
And that is a
Follow-up.
precedent. Oh, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
I was gonna say follow-up question on that in regards to this targeted EIDL advance. You said they don't need to reapply, which I understand. Is there a time frame in which these previous applicants are going to be contacted, or is there a way for them to find out if they're going to fall into that category?
Soon is the best word we have at this point. I think you'll know that it's coming when the lookup tool, like the little map, there's going to be a map where folks can look up their address to identify if they're in a low-income neighborhood. That's probably something else that we'll push out, through our partners like yourself. And that suggests that at least that first priority group is probably coming pretty soon. But other than that, no, we can't predict any kind of timelines at this point.
So there's currently not a way for someone to basically check.
No,
because I know I'm going to be asking that question.
So I guess section 45D subparagraph E of the Internal Revenue Code defines a low-income neighborhood, but I don't know if there's a map. So I'll be honest. That's about as much as we can. The Economic Aid Act determined that's how it is to be determined.
Just a point of clarification, if possible, and sorry if you've answered this, but it's one that I'm struggling with. When we read the targeted EIDL advance, it seems to indicate that people who have already received some funding, but then they also have to be in a low income community and show a 30%. So is that how you determine, like priority one, you received $1,000, we're going to determine if you're in a low neighborhood and can demonstrate a reduction in income of earnings rather than 30%?
Correct. So that is the eligibility requirement, is the neighborhood and the reduction in revenues. All recipients must meet that eligibility requirement.
Okay, that answers my question.
Are just what they are. Like those are, how SBA is going to prioritize the funding. That's it.
Okay, super. Thank you, Dan. That answers, clarifies what I was struggling with.
Sure.
So our next question is about PPP, and it's I'm a seasonal business and I won't reopen until June 2021. PPP second draw application deadline is March 31st or until the money runs out. If I get a PPP second draw in February, is it okay to start spending down the money in June when my business reopens?
So from the day of your disbursement of your loan, you have a maximum of 24 weeks to use the funds and those funds be eligible for forgiveness. So you do, so I guess theoretically, you can get to June, but what is 24 weeks? I can't do the math right now. I mean, you'll have some runway, but you're gonna have to be very careful about, managing the allocation of those funds. And I'm sure Angela would be happy to help you put together a spreadsheet. And the folks at the SBDC, not Angela personally, maybe, but the SBDC, to help plan out your use of funds. Okay, because again, your covered period starts the day of disbursement. There is no delaying the day of your disbursement due to business circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, right? The intent of the PPP is that you apply for the money, you get the money, you spend the money, you apply for forgiveness in a pretty regular fashion. It's not meant to be something you apply for and then kind of keep as a nest egg, maybe spend it in the future if you need it. The whole point of the program is that funds are dispersed and sort of injected into the economy to support payroll. That's the essence, the name of the program itself. So it's meant to get it, into the business and get to the employees or the owner, in the case of sole proprietors, and churn and move through the economy, not be kept as kind of a rainy day fund for some
And I
time.
understand that point, Jeff, but the problem is we also have many, many seasonal businesses, some of whom are completely shut down in the winter. So if they don't get funding by March 31st, they're basically left out in the cold. And how do they reopen? So the question is, can they apply for PPP and use it only in June when they actually start to have expenses again? Right now, they're very, very minor expenses, right? So
Yep, I get it. I get it. So that's where that's where some of those precise calculations come in. And remember to the 60-40 split, right? So the eligible expenses on those non-payroll side, the 40% or less, are now greater. So they could potentially more easily achieve full forgiveness with 40% or less of the funds. And then to your point, if there could be some greater disbursement of the payroll towards the end of that 24-week covered period, that could be a strategy. But I'm just saying in total, the intent isn't to apply for it and to sit on it. It's meant to be deployed, immediately.
thank you.
Jeff, a follow-up question to that, just in reading some of the language of the new targeted dates of being able to, there's a specific question here that I wanted to jump to just because I think it relates to this coverage period. And it says, explain a little bit more about how that coverage period has changed as opposed to the last PPP, and how do you indicate when you pick that covered period? Does it come within the? I think this question came from someone who's looking at a first draw and doesn't quite understand exactly how you identify the specific covered period.
Yeah. So again, as Dan said, the covered period begins immediately upon receipt of the funds from the bank. So you apply for the money. The bank submits it to the SBA. We give them the approval. We give it a number, earmark the funds for guarantee, and then the bank or credit union disperses the money to the borrower. That day or the next day, the covered period begins. And like I said, previously it was 8 weeks, or then it was 8 or 24 weeks. Now it's any amount of time between 8 and 24 weeks. It's whatever makes sense for the business. So if you can spend the money sooner and maintain, your head count and all that stuff, and then apply for forgiveness, do it in 8 or 9 weeks. Or conversely, if you need some greater amount of time, up to 24 weeks, take that time, find ways to spend the monies in ways that are, eligible for maximum full forgiveness, and do that. So the flexibility to use the funds exists and is something that the borrower, the recipient, the business owner, or the nonprofit organization can sort of define as is most appropriate for their business circumstances.
Thanks for helping to clarify that. Next question is, with PPP second draw, could you help please clarify the payroll headcount maintenance rules? How long do I need to maintain payroll and headcount levels? Could I reduce headcount once I finish spending the PPP funds without any penalty?
So generally, to maximize forgiveness, borrowers should, during their covered period, maintain employment and wages. So literally from, if I got a PPP loan last week, from now to whatever, say it's 8 weeks, I should maintain my employment and wages to maximize my eligibility for forgiveness. Now, if you review the forgiveness applications, which I think everybody should do, because this answers a lot of the questions we get about for forgiveness, there are a lot of different scenarios that could mitigate the FTE / salary / wage reductions. For example, if there's if your business if you're unable to maintain employment due to the government requirements, for example, right? You can make that attestation, then you would not necessarily be subject to the FTE reduction. as an example. So in all cases, the answer is usually in the form. I know I sound like a bureaucrat when I say go look at the form, but it kind of goes through a lot of the different examples. So I don't want to read the whole form here, but borrowers that received a PPP loan of more than 50,000 or 50,000 or less, that together with their affiliates, I know it's kind of government speak. Such a borrower is not subject to any reductions if the authorized representative of the borrower can attest that the borrower did not reduce annual salaries or hourly wages of any employee by more than 25% during the covered period compared to the most recent full quarter before the covered period. So we're talking about like literally what was my wages last quarter if I'm applying now, right? That answers that part of the question. And two, that either the borrower did not reduce number of employees or the average paid hours of employees between January 1st, 2020 and the end of the covered period, or B, the borrower was unable to operate during the covered period at the same level of business activity, that's the key one, as before February 15th, 2020, due to compliance with requirements established or guidance issued during the pandemic, essentially.
Is that a rule for PPP 1 and PPP 2?
It's the same forgiveness application. There's no
Okay.
There's no difference for forgiveness with respect to PPP 1 or PPP 2.
Okay.
There's one. Well, there's three forgiveness applications, depending on what certifications you can make: 3508S, 3508EZ, and the 3508, the long form. But it's the same for all PPP loans. So
remember too, what Dan said in the beginning, you've got that 25% flex factor as well. So you've got all these different, what we call safe harbor provisions, right? So if you hired somebody for cause, if they resigned and of their own volition, if the position was so unique that you were unable to find a suitable like candidate to replace that, all these different sort of caveats are in there. So you got the 25% flex factor.
Well, that's just for wages.
Yeah,
Just
these
for the
different
wages.
harbor provisions. Yeah. All of that helps you hopefully achieve that requirement.
Yeah. And I think one other thing to keep in mind is a lot of folks have been asking about the question on the form about how many employees do I have? That's literally how many people work for you, right? Like there's no half people, right? Like this is not, it's more about the eligibility, where you're saying I have 30 people that work for me. That is not saying that I have 30 FTEs, because that's not the question that the form asks, okay? The whole FTE thing comes into play with the forgiveness.
And it sounds as well that they're looking at the payroll amounts that were utilized to justify the loan. So that, the quarter before or the period that they were using, and that time period of the covered time period for the loan, not things that will then happen after that coverage period, correct?
Oh yeah, correct. So like once you have utilized the funds, there's not an ongoing requirement. I mean, you've used the funds, right? And you can apply for forgiveness, and that snapshot in time is over with, right? Nobody's going back and checking, next week after you apply for forgiveness, do you still have 25 employees? No, that's not part of that's not how it works.
That covered period is your performance period. So think of it that way, right? And again, that's why having the flexibility to define that covered period as being shorter or longer can be helpful. So that's your performance period in terms of spending the money and the headcount and wages, things that we're talking about now. So if it's better for you to make that shorter, make it shorter. And the opposite is also true.
So Dan, just a point to clarify, on the forgiveness form, it specifically says employees at time of application. So for example, my client applied for PPP first job, May 1st, 2020. That's the date that they would put to answer that question in the forgiveness form, right? Employee at time of application, May 1st, 6 employees as an example.
Correct.
They are now only asking, supplying, submitting forgiveness for that first PPP. So they're a seasonal business. So it says employee at time of forgiveness application. And let's just say we're going to work on this afternoon. So it'll be today's date, 0 employees. They'll
Mhm.
be the correct responses on that form?
Yes,
Or
that's
did-
correct.
Okay.
I mean, that's correct. I mean, it's
Strange, but it is correct.
it is strange, but it is correct. And I guess I think it is even more confusing if you're using the simplified form, frankly, because the long form includes all the worksheets, right, for FTEs and all that stuff. So, and we get a lot of questions on that. And I guess, the answer is, if you're not sure if you can make the certification about FTEs and wages, well, then you need to go and at least take a look and fill out those long form worksheets, because that's what they're there for, is to help you make that determination. You don't have to submit them or use them if you realize, oh, I don't need to send all this paperwork. I can use the simple form, right? But that's how you answer the question, right? About some of these items. And then it becomes a little bit clearer, but there's a little bit more work, right, involved. If you know that you've maintained all these things and you're good, then then fine. You don't have to, but if you're not sure, then I would recommend taking a look at the worksheets in the long form and taking advantage of them.
So we're getting a little bit close to some of the time that I think we had allotted for the session. Just a quick question to clarify some of the tax implications because it's tax season, right? Or coming up to tax season, and some of the deductibility of those expenses and how folks should be looking at money received from these programs and how they affect their 2020 taxes if they received stuff with it for last year, and then also for upcoming a year from now, the upcoming tax season. So I think there's specific expenses that can be deducted, but also how does the receiving the PPP loan and EIDL affect returns?
So short answer is the Economic Aid Act fixed a lot of things and made it easier for everybody. Long answer is the CARES Act required that the forgiven PPP funds and EIDL advance funds not be treated as taxable income. The IRS then published a rule that said, that's fine. We have existing regulations that say if you have things that are treated as non-taxable income, grants, forgiven loans, that sort of thing, it won't be treated as taxable income, but you also can't deduct the expenses that you use those funds to pay. The Economic Aid Act eliminated the requirement that those expenses not be deductible. So any expenses you use the forgiven PPP funds are now deductible. So payroll, whatever, right? It simplifies your record keeping for sure. It did not eliminate the requirement that if you take advantage of any of the the COVID tax credits for employment, that's still in place, right? So you're gonna have to work with your income tax provider, and if you wish to take advantage of those tax credits, that would reduce your forgiveness. So I think that answers the question. It's a lot easier now.
I know, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time that we're able to provide for this session. I want to personally thank Jeff and Dan and Bernard for your time to sit in with us to help answer our questions, to provide a little bit more insight in these programs, because it is, like you said, Jeff, pretty transformative type of programs never seen before. So to be able to get some insight directly from folks who are helping to implement it, we're greatly appreciative, and I want to thank you. Matt, do you have any parting words?
I noticed. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the SBA team and all of our partners. And I just encourage you to reach out to us, encourage you to reach out to the Small Business Development Center, and of course, visit the SBA's website for the most up-to-date information.
I was going to reiterate the same thing about make sure for folks who are going to be watching this later, because we had a whole host of folks that are going to be looking at this at a later time, to go directly to the source, which is sba.gov, to be able to find the information that you need. And also, we know that Matt and I and Angela, folks at SBDC, the chambers can help answer questions, and I know Jeff and Dan are also willing and available to help continue the conversation. So thanks everyone for listening in and watching, and I appreciate the time.
Guys, thanks for the opportunity. Take
Have a
care.
great day, everyone.
Up there.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.